When my ex-husband who abandoned us 15 years ago crashed my daughter's funeral, demanding her $35 million inheritance, I watched him stride down that church aisle like he owned the place. 15 years of silence, apparently meaning nothing when money was involved. The bastard actually had the nerve to sit in the front row next to me, whispering about our rights while my Sophia lay in her casket. If you're watching this, subscribe to Granny's Voice and let me know where you're watching from. I'm Dorothy Henderson, and this is how I learned that some people will crawl out from under any rock for the right price. Let me paint you the picture. There I was, 65 years old, burying the only person who ever truly mattered to me when Marcus Webb decides to make his grand entrance. 15 years. 15 years since he walked out on us. And suddenly he's back because Sophia made something of herself without him. Dot, he whispered, sliding into the pew like nothing had happened. We need to talk about Sophia's estate. I turned to look at this man I'd once loved. This stranger who'd abandoned his 8-year-old daughter when things got tough. His hair was gray now. Expensive suit perfectly tailored. Manicured nails resting on his knee. Success looked good on him, which made me want to slap him even more. We don't need to talk about anything, Marcus, I said, keeping my voice low. You gave up any rights to her when you disappeared. He leaned closer and I could smell his cologne. Still wearing that same brand he'd worn when we were married. Some things never change, I guess. She was my daughter, too. I have legal standing. Legal standing. He had legal standing while I had sleepless nights nursing Sophia through fever dreams when she was 9. Legal standing while I worked 2 jobs to pay for her college applications. Legal standing while I held her hand through 6 months of chemotherapy, watching leukemia steal the light from her brilliant eyes. Reverend Collins began the eulogy, talking about Sophia's kindness, her intelligence, her incredible business success, 23 years old and worth more than most people see in 10 lifetimes. My baby girl who'd started coding at 12 and built her first app at 16. Marcus nodded along like he'd been there for any of it, like he'd earned the right to mourn. She built that company thinking of you, you know, he whispered during the closing hymn. Always wondered where her old man was. That's when I realized Marcus Webb hadn't just shown up at our daughter's funeral. He'd come armed with lies, ready to rewrite history for his own benefit. But if he thought 15 years of abandonment had left me weak, he was about to learn exactly how wrong he could be. After the service, I watched him work the crowd, introducing himself to Sophia's business partners and friends like the grieving father he'd never been. The performance was flawless, and I knew right then this was going to get ugly. Sophia's story started when she was 19, sitting in our tiny apartment kitchen with a laptop older than some of her college classmates. Mom, she'd said, looking up from lines of code I couldn't understand. I think I figured out how to fix the problem nobody else can solve. She'd been obsessed with medical data security ever since I'd told her about the nightmare we'd faced when her father left. Hospitals losing patient records, insurance companies denying coverage because files went missing, people dying because their medical history disappeared into digital black holes. Sophia took it personally. What if medical records could be completely secure but instantly accessible to any authorized person? Anywhere in the world. Her eyes bright with possibility. What if no one ever had to suffer because their information got lost or hacked? I'd smiled and made her another cup of coffee, thinking it was a sweet dream. I was working as a hospital administrator then, seeing the same data problems she talked about every single day. The difference was Sophia believed she could fix them. 6 months later, she dropped out of college. I nearly had a heart attack. Mom, I got into the Tech Accelerator program, she'd explained, practically bouncing with excitement. They're giving me $50,000 and 3 months to build MedScure. Real investors want to see what I can do. Sweetheart, you're throwing away your education for what might be a pipe dream, I'd argued, terrified she was making the biggest mistake of her life. She'd looked at me with those serious green eyes she'd inherited from her grandmother. Mom, what if it's not a pipe dream? What if this could help millions of people? What if I could make sure no family ever goes through what we went through? That accelerator program changed everything. Sophia didn't just build MedScure, she revolutionized how medical data worked. By 21, hospitals across the country were implementing her system. By 22, international health organizations were paying millions for licenses. The day Forbes called her the medical data genius who could save lives, Sophia had cried in my arms. Not from joy but from exhaustion. Success was incredible, but it was also overwhelming for someone barely old enough to drink legally. "I did it for us, Mom," she'd whispered that night. "I wanted to prove that what happened to our family mattered. That we could turn Dad's abandonment into something that helped other people." $35 million. That's what MedScure was worth when Sophia got sick. $35 million that represented not just brilliant coding and business acumen, but every sacrifice we'd made, every night I'd worked late to pay for her computer classes, every moment she'd chosen to fight for something bigger than herself. Now Marcus wanted his share, like he'd contributed anything beyond DNA and heartbreak. But what Marcus didn't know was that Sophia had been expecting this day long before she got sick. My brilliant daughter had seen him coming from a mile away. The day Marcus left us, Sophia had been building a blanket fort in our living room. 8 years old, missing her 2 front teeth, completely unaware that her world was about to collapse. She'd invited me inside her fort for a tea party with her stuffed animals, using the good china I'd been saving for special occasions. "Daddy's been acting weird," she'd said, pouring imaginary tea for Captain Whiskers, her teddy bear. "He keeps looking at his phone and talking in whisper voices." I'd forced a smile, pretending everything was normal, even though I'd found the divorce papers Marcus thought he'd hidden so well. "Sometimes grown-ups have big feelings, sweetheart. It doesn't mean anything's wrong." But everything was wrong. Marcus had been having an affair with his secretary for 6 months. Classic, right? The cheating husband, the loyal wife who didn't see it coming, the innocent child caught in the crossfire. If it wasn't happening to me, I would have rolled my eyes at the cliché. "Dad, we need to talk," he'd said when he got home that evening. His voice already distant, already gone. Sophia had run to hug him like always, and I'd watched his face carefully. No guilt, no sadness, just impatience to get through an unpleasant task. That's when I knew our marriage wasn't ending because he'd fallen out of love with me. It was ending because he'd never really loved either of us at all. "Sophia, honey, go play in your room for a few minutes," I'd said, my voice surprisingly steady. "Daddy and I need to discuss some boring grown-up stuff." She'd skipped away, humming to herself, still living in a world where her parents worked things out and families stayed together. 5 minutes later, that world would be gone forever. "I'm leaving," Marcus had said without preamble. No apology, no explanation of the affair, no acknowledgement of what this would do to Sophia. I filed for divorce. "I'll be out by the weekend." "What about Sophia?" I'd asked, though I already knew the answer from his expression. "She'll be better off with you. Kids need stability." And Vanessa and I were planning to travel, build a life together. Sophia would just complicate things. Our daughter, his flesh and blood, would complicate his new life. I'd wanted to scream, to throw something, to make him understand what he was destroying. Instead, I'd nodded quietly and started planning how to tell an 8-year-old that her daddy was choosing someone else over her. The weekend came and went. Marcus packed his belongings with ruthless efficiency, kissed Sophia's forehead like he was leaving for a business trip, and walked out of our lives without looking back. Sophia had stood at the window for 3 hours that first night, convinced he'd forgotten something and would come back for it. "Maybe he'll remember Captain Whiskers," she'd whispered. "Daddy gave him to me for my birthday." But Marcus never came back. No phone calls, no birthday cards, no Christmas presents. Complete radio silence while I worked 2 jobs and Sophia learned not to ask about her father anymore. 15 years later, here he was, perfectly groomed and legally prepared, ready to claim his share of the fortune Sophia built while missing him every single day of her life. Some people have no shame, but then again, some people also have no idea what they're really up against. The morning after Sophia's funeral, I was sitting in my kitchen drinking coffee that tasted like sadness when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I could see Marcus standing on my porch with a thin man in an expensive suit carrying a leather briefcase. Lawyers, of course. I took my time answering, finishing my coffee, and checking my hair in the hallway mirror. Not because I cared how I looked to Marcus, but because showing up looking like death would give him ammunition. I'd learned a long time ago that dignity was sometimes the only weapon you had. Marcus said with his politician smile when I opened the door. I'd like you to meet Gregory Lawson, my attorney. We were hoping we could have a civilized conversation about Sophia's estate. How civilized can we be, Marcus? I asked, not inviting them in. You haven't spoken to Sophia in 15 years, and now you want half her money. Gregory Lawson stepped forward, all professional polish and legal intimidation, but something in his expression suggested he wasn't entirely comfortable with this case. Mrs. Henderson, he said, I understand this is an emotional time, but there are legitimate legal questions that need to be addressed. Mr. Webb maintains he has parental rights. Maintains, I repeated, catching the careful word choice. That's interesting phrasing for something that should be straightforward legal fact. Lawson shifted slightly and I caught Marcus shooting him a warning look. The law regarding parental rights can be complex. We're here to discuss a reasonable settlement that avoids costly litigation. I stepped aside and let them into my living room, not because I wanted to, but because this conversation needed to happen somewhere private. Marcus looked around at the modest furniture, the family photos covering every surface, the life he'd walked away from without a backward glance. You've kept it exactly the same, he said, sounding genuinely surprised. Even Sophia's school pictures. Why would I change it? Yes. This was our home. Sophia's and mine. The home you chose to leave. Gregory Lawson opened his briefcase, but his movement seemed hesitant. Mrs. Henderson, before we proceed, I need to ask, are you aware of any documentation regarding Mr. Webb's parental status? Any court orders or legal modifications? Marcus's face went pale. Gregory, we discussed this. My situation is complicated, but what kind of complications? I asked, sensing weakness. Lawson looked between Marcus and me, clearly uncomfortable. Mr. Webb, I think you need to explain the situation fully. I can't represent you effectively without complete disclosure. What situation? Pressed. Marcus's confidence was cracking. That there were some legal proceedings years ago. When you were trying to get child support, I had to make some difficult decisions. That's when the pieces started falling into place. The way Lawson had phrased maintains he has rights, instead of stating it as fact. The hesitation, the careful language, the obvious tension between lawyer and client. Marcus, I said quietly, what exactly did you do to avoid paying child support? The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. My ex-husband hadn't just abandoned Sophia emotionally. He'd done something legal, something permanent, something that was about to destroy his inheritance claims completely. And his own lawyer was beginning to realize he'd been lied to. I think, Gregory Lawson said carefully, closing his briefcase, that I need to conduct some additional research before we proceed further. Mr. Webb, we should discuss this privately. Marcus was sweating now despite the cool morning air. Gregory, I explained that the situation was complex. We can work around any complications. Can we? Lawson asked pointedly. Because if there are existing court orders that terminate or modify your parental rights, that fundamentally changes the legal landscape. I watched this exchange with growing satisfaction. Marcus had clearly misled his attorney about the extent of his legal problems, and now it was coming back to bite him. What court orders? I asked innocently, though I was beginning to suspect what Sophia had discovered during her illness. Lawson looked at Marcus expectantly. When no answer came, he stood up. Mr. Webb, I'm going to need you to provide me with complete copies of all legal proceedings related to your relationship with your daughter. All of them. After they left, with Lawson looking increasingly unhappy and Marcus desperately trying to maintain control of a crumbling situation, I sat back in my chair and thought about Sophia's final months. She'd been so weak from chemotherapy, but there had been days when she'd rallied enough to work on her laptop. I'd assumed she was managing business affairs, but now I wondered if she'd been doing something else entirely. My daughter had always been thorough when it came to protecting the people she loved. The phone rang an hour later. Rachel Torres's name appeared on the caller ID. "Dorothy, I saw the news coverage of Sophia's funeral," Rachel's familiar voice said. "I'm so sorry for your loss." Sophia was extraordinary. Rachel Torres had been Sophia's mentor since the early days of MedScure. Not a business partner but something almost as valuable. A successful entrepreneur who'd taken Sophia under her wing and guided her through the complexities of building a tech company. Sophia had talked about Rachel constantly, crediting her with much of MedScure's strategic success. "Thank you, Rachel. Sophia always spoke so highly of you." "Dorothy, I'm calling because Sophia asked me to reach out if certain situations arose after her death. She was concerned about potential complications regarding her estate." Felt my pulse quicken. What kind of complications? The kind involving absent fathers who might suddenly develop an interest in inheritance rights. Sophia was quite thorough in her preparations. "She asked me to coordinate with you if such a situation developed." "Coordinate how?" Rachel's voice carried a note of grim satisfaction. "Sophia left very specific instructions about protecting you and her legacy from opportunistic relatives. She anticipated that her father might emerge from whatever rock he'd been hiding under if her success became public knowledge. She prepared for this. Dorothy, your daughter spent the last year of her life building legal and strategic defenses against exactly this scenario. She had investigators, attorneys, and evidence. She knew her father better than he knew himself." I thought about Marcus's sweating face, his nervous lawyer, the obvious gaps in his story. "Rachel, what exactly did Sophia discover?" "Everything. And she made sure that if her father tried to claim inheritance rights, the full truth about his character would become public knowledge. Sophia didn't just build a company, Dorothy. She built a fortress around everyone she loved." That evening, as I sat in Sophia's old room looking through her papers, I found a sealed envelope with my name on it. Inside was a letter in Sophia's careful handwriting. "Mom, if you're reading this, it means Dad showed up looking for money. Don't worry, I've handled everything. Trust Rachel, and remember, I love you more than all the money in the world." The next morning, Gregory Lawson called with news that would change everything. "Mrs. Henderson." Gregory Lawson's voice was tight with professional embarrassment. "I need to inform you that I'm withdrawing as Mr. Webb's counsel. There are ethical issues that prevent me from continuing representation." "What kind of ethical issues?" I asked, though I could guess. "Client confidentiality prevents me from discussing details, but I can say that Mr. Webb was not forthcoming about crucial aspects of his legal status regarding parental rights." After he hung up, I called Rachel Torres. "Marcus's lawyer just quit. What did Sophia find?" Rachel's laugh was sharp. "Sophia found that your ex-husband legally terminated his parental rights 11 years ago to avoid paying child support. He has zero legal claim to her estate." The timeline clicked into place. When Sophia was 12, I'd hired a lawyer to pursue back child support. The case had mysteriously stalled, and I'd been told something about changed circumstances. I'd been too overwhelmed, working 2 jobs to understand the legal complexities. "He chose to legally abandon Sophia to save himself $300 a month," Rachel continued. "And now he wants to claim $35 million. The irony is breathtaking. Why didn't Sophia tell me? She wanted to protect you from the pain, but she also wanted to be prepared if he ever tried to stake a claim on her success." That afternoon, Rachel arrived at my house with a detailed folder of documents. Sophia's investigation had been thorough, but not the elaborate spy network I might have imagined. She'd hired a competent private investigator and worked with estate attorneys to document Marcus's abandonment. "Sophia also discovered something else," Rachel said, showing me photographs and documents. "Your ex-husband has a pattern of targeting women with resources and then abandoning them when the money runs out. The photos showed Marcus with different women over the years since leaving us. After he left you, he lived with Diana Foster and her 4-year-old daughter Maya for 3 years. When Diana's savings ran out, he disappeared. Then he married Vanessa Blake for her inheritance money. But the most damaging revelation was yet to come. Sophia tracked down Diana Foster 2 years ago. Diana's daughter Maya is now 16. And she's been dealing with the same abandonment issues Sophia faced. Rachel showed me correspondence between Sophia and Diana. My daughter had been quietly helping Maya Foster with college preparation and counseling, creating a support network for children abandoned by the same man. Sophia prepared for the possibility that Marcus would challenge her estate, Rachel explained. She documented his pattern of abandoning children, gathered evidence of financial exploitation, and created a comprehensive case that would destroy his credibility. The folder contained testimonies from Diana Foster about Marcus's financial abuse, documentation of his terminated parental rights, and evidence of his current financial desperation. Sophia hadn't just protected her estate. She'd built a case that would expose Marcus's true character if he dared to challenge her wishes. "There's one more thing," Rachel said, pulling out a final document. Sophia arranged for all of this information to be released to selected journalists if Marcus pursued inheritance claims. She wanted his pattern of abandoning children to become public knowledge. That's when I understood the full scope of Sophia's preparations. My daughter hadn't just anticipated Marcus's greed. She'd created consequences that would follow him for the rest of his life if he tried to profit from abandoning her. The next morning Marcus called. His voice was desperate, all pretense of charm gone. But Sophia's plan was already in motion, and there was no stopping what came next. "We need to talk." Marcus's voice cracked through the phone. "Things have gotten complicated. Vanessa found out about Sophia. She's furious I didn't tell her I had a daughter." "Imagine that," I said dryly. "Your wife is upset you lied about having a child. How shocking. She's threatening to leave me. She says I deceived her about being childless. She's talking about lawyers, about our prenup being invalid because of misrepresentation." I could hear the panic in his voice. Marcus's second marriage was falling apart. And from what Rachel had shown me, Vanessa Blake's inheritance money was all that stood between Marcus and complete financial ruin. "Marcus, what do you want from me? I need Sophia's inheritance more than ever. Vanessa's cutting me off financially. My construction business is bankrupt. I have nowhere else to turn. You should have thought about that before you legally terminated your parental rights." The silence on the other end was deafening. Who told you about that?" "Sophia knew Marcus. She's known for years. My daughter was brilliant. Remember. Did you really think she wouldn't investigate the man who abandoned her?" That afternoon, Rachel and I met with Sophia's estate attorney, James Parker. A thorough, careful man in his 50s, James had worked with Sophia to create ironclad protections against exactly this situation. "Mrs. Henderson," James explained, "Sophia's estate planning is comprehensive. Your ex-husband's terminated parental rights make any inheritance claim legally impossible. But Sophia went further than just legal protection." He showed us a timeline Sophia had created, documenting Marcus's pattern of financial exploitation. After leaving us, Marcus had systematically drained Diana Foster's savings before abandoning her and her daughter. He'd married Vanessa Blake primarily for her trust fund, which he'd been depleting through failed business ventures. Sophia wanted his behavior documented not just for legal protection, but for the protection of future victims, James continued. She believed men like your ex-husband continue their patterns until someone stops them. The plan Sophia had created was elegant in its simplicity. If Marcus pursued inheritance claims, the documentation of his abandoned children and financial exploitation would become public record through court filings. If he escalated with media attention or harassment, Sophia had prepared even more devastating revelations. Sophia also established a fund, Rachel added, to help children abandoned by absent parents. She specifically wanted Maya Foster and other victims of your ex-husband's abandonment to receive educational support. That evening, Diana Foster called me. Mrs. Henderson, I wanted to thank you for what Sophia did for Maya. Your daughter reached out to us 2 years ago and has been helping with college preparation. I didn't know Sophia had contacted you. She said she understood what Maya was going through because she'd lived it herself. Sophia helped Maya get counseling and tutoring. She said, girls who lose their fathers need other women to show them they're worth something. Talking to Diana was like looking into a mirror of my own experience. Marcus had charmed his way into her life, played stepfather to her daughter, systematically depleted her resources, and then vanished when the money ran out. The hardest part, Diana said, was explaining to a 7-year-old why the man who'd been reading her bedtime stories suddenly didn't want to see her anymore. That night, I finally understood the full scope of Sophia's legacy. She hadn't just built a successful company. She'd created a network of protection and support for people like us. The ones Marcus Webb had used and discarded. And now, facing financial ruin and exposure, Marcus was about to learn what it felt like to be abandoned by someone you thought you could count on. The news articles started appearing 3 days later. Not through any elaborate media conspiracy Sophia had arranged, but through simple public records requests that journalists made after Marcus's bankruptcy filing mentioned potential inheritance disputes. Construction company owner seeks inheritance from daughter he abandoned, appeared first in the local business journal. Then larger papers picked up the story. The terminated parental rights document became public record when Marcus's new lawyer tried to file a challenge petition. Rachel showed me the coverage over coffee. Sophia didn't have to orchestrate media attention. She just had to ensure that when Marcus made his grab for money, the truth about his character would be easily discoverable. My phone had been ringing all morning. Reporters wanted statements about Marcus's claims. I declined interviews, but the story was growing on its own momentum. Marcus Webb, the man who'd legally abandoned his 8-year-old daughter to avoid child support, was now seeking millions from her estate. Vanessa Blake called me directly. Mrs. Henderson, I'm Vanessa Blake. I believe you knew my husband before I met him. Yes, Marcus is my ex-husband. I'm filing for divorce, Vanessa said bluntly. I've discovered he lied to me about having children and has been systematically depleting my inheritance. I wanted you to know that I completely support your position regarding Sophia's estate. Thank you. That means more than you know. Vanessa's voice hardened. Mrs. Henderson, Marcus Webb is a predator. He targets women with resources and bleeds them dry. I've been documenting his financial abuse for months, and I'm prepared to testify about his character if necessary. That afternoon, Marcus appeared at my door without calling. He looked terrible. Unshaven, rumpled clothes, the polish completely gone from his appearance. Please. The media attention is destroying what's left of my life. Vanessa's filed for divorce. Her lawyers have frozen our joint accounts. I'm going to lose everything. You lost everything that mattered 15 years ago, I said. You just didn't realize it at the time. I made mistakes, but Sophia was still my daughter. I deserve something from her success. Marcus, you legally terminated your parental rights. You chose $300 a month over having a daughter. That decision has consequences. His desperation was palpable. There has to be something we can work out, some way to settle this quietly. The only settlement available is the one Sophia already provided, I said. She left detailed instructions about what should happen if you tried to claim her inheritance. I handed him a sealed envelope Rachel had prepared. Inside was Sophia's final message to her father written in her own hand during her last weeks. To Marcus Webb, you terminated your legal rights to me when I was 11 years old to avoid paying child support. You chose money over your own daughter then, and you're choosing money over her memory now. I have legally ensured you will receive exactly what you chose to give me over the past 15 years. Nothing. Marcus read the letter twice, his hands shaking. She really knew about the termination. She knew everything, Marcus. About Diana Foster and her daughter, about your financial abuse of Vanessa, about every family you've destroyed chasing easy money. That's when Marcus finally understood he hadn't just lost an inheritance claim. Sophia's documentation of his pattern would follow him for the rest of his life. But the story wasn't over. Sophia had one final surprise that would ensure Marcus could never do this to another family again. The call came from Diana Foster the next morning. "Mrs. Henderson, I've been contacted by several other women. Women who had relationships with Marcus Webb over the years. Other women. It appears your ex-husband has a more extensive pattern than any of us realized." Sophia's private investigator found at least 4 women Marcus targeted for their financial resources before abandoning them and their children. Rachel arrived an hour later with a folder of additional documentation. Sophia's investigation had uncovered a trail of broken families stretching back to shortly after Marcus left us. Your daughter was very thorough. She didn't just document Marcus's abandonment of Sophia and Maya Foster. She found a pattern of financial predation. The women had remarkably similar stories. Marcus would charm his way into relationships with single mothers or women with inherited wealth. He'd play devoted partner and stepfather while systematically accessing and depleting their resources. When the money ran out, he'd disappear, often leaving behind confused children who'd bonded with him. Sophia reached out to some of these women before she died, Rachel explained. She helped them understand they weren't alone and provided resources for counseling and legal support. That afternoon, James Parker called with news about Marcus's latest legal maneuver. He's hired a new attorney who's trying to argue that his parental rights termination was coerced. They're claiming he was pressured into signing documents he didn't understand. Can they make that argument stick? Not with the evidence Sophia compiled. The termination was voluntary, witnessed, and Marcus had legal representation. But more importantly, Sophia anticipated this exact argument. Sophia had recorded a video deposition during her final month, specifically addressing the possibility that Marcus might claim his rights termination was invalid. In clear, lucid testimony, she detailed how she discovered the termination documents and her father's pattern of abandoning children. Sophia also arranged for Diana Foster and the other women to provide sworn statements about Marcus's character and pattern of behavior. James continued, "If Marcus wants to challenge his terminated rights, all of this evidence becomes admissible." But Sophia's master stroke was yet to be revealed. She'd established not just a defense against Marcus's claims, but a counteroffensive that would ensure he faced consequences for his lifetime of abandoning children. Sophia set up a victims' advocacy fund, Rachel explained. If Marcus pursued inheritance claims beyond the initial demand, the fund would finance a class action lawsuit against him on behalf of all the children he'd abandoned. The fund had enough money to pursue Marcus legally for years. Every child he'd bonded with and then abandoned could seek damages for emotional distress and the psychological impact of his desertion. Your daughter essentially created a legal trap, James said admiringly. The more aggressively Marcus pursued her inheritance, the more devastating the consequences would become for him personally. That evening, Marcus's new attorney called, requesting a settlement conference. The desperation in his voice suggested they'd finally grasped the full scope of what Sophia had prepared for them. But Sophia had one final revelation that would end Marcus's inheritance claims permanently and expose the true depths of his character to everyone who'd ever trusted him. The settlement conference took place in James Parker's office. Marcus arrived with his new attorney, a younger man named Tyler Rodriguez, who looked like he'd bitten off more than he could chew. "My client is prepared to significantly reduce his inheritance claim in exchange for avoiding further public scrutiny," Rodriguez began carefully. "Your client has no inheritance claim," James responded. "His parental rights were legally terminated. This meeting is purely a courtesy." Marcus looked haggard, wearing the same clothes from 3 days earlier. The media attention and Vanessa's divorce filing had clearly taken their toll. "Please. I know I made mistakes, but there has to be something, some acknowledgement that I was Sophia's father." "You were her biological father," I said quietly. But you chose not to be her parent when she needed one. Rodriguez tried a different approach. Even if the parental rights termination stands, there might be grounds for a moral claim. Mr. Webb contributed genetically to Sophia's intelligence and abilities. Rachel, who'd been silent until now, laughed out loud. Are you seriously arguing that Marcus Webb deserves money because Sophia inherited intelligence from the man who abandoned her to avoid $300 a month? That's when James opened Sophia's final file. Actually, there's something else we need to discuss. Sophia's investigation uncovered information about Mr. Webb that goes beyond abandoning children for financial reasons. The room fell silent as James placed a stack of documents on the table. Sophia discovered that Mr. Webb has been using false identities and social security numbers to avoid debt collectors and hide assets from ex-wives. Marcus went pale. That's not, I never. The documentation is comprehensive, James continued. Credit applications under false names. Bank accounts opened with stolen identities. Tax evasion spanning multiple states. Sophia's investigators found evidence of identity theft and fraud going back 12 years. Rodriguez looked like he wanted to disappear. This is the first I'm hearing of this. Sophia anticipated that revealing Marcus's criminal activity might be necessary to protect her mother from harassment, Rachel explained. She wanted to ensure that if Marcus continued pursuing inheritance claims, law enforcement would become involved. The identity fraud evidence was devastating. Marcus had been creating false personas to obtain credit and avoid legal obligations to his abandoned families. The Social Security fraud alone carried federal penalties that could result in years of prison time. Sophia left instructions that if her father escalated his inheritance claims beyond initial contact, this evidence should be forwarded to federal prosecutors, James said. She wanted to ensure he couldn't continue victimizing women and children. Marcus was shaking now. Please, don't let them do this. I'll drop all claims. I'll disappear. Just don't turn over those files. I looked at this pathetic man who'd once been my husband, the father of my brilliant daughter. Marcus, you should have thought about consequences before you chose to prey on vulnerable families for 15 years. Rodriguez was hastily packing his briefcase. Mr. Webb, I need to advise you that I can't continue representation given these allegations. That's when Sophia's final message was revealed. A video she'd recorded days before her death, specifically intended for this moment. Sophia's pale but determined face appeared on James's laptop screen. Dad, if you're watching this, it means you tried to claim money from the daughter you abandoned. I've documented every family you've destroyed, every child you've left wondering why they weren't worth staying for. The legal evidence I've compiled will ensure you face consequences for your choices. But more than that, I want you to know that despite everything you did to us, Mom and I built a beautiful life. We were happy. We succeeded. And we did it all without you. The video continued. I'm leaving my fortune to help children abandoned by parents like you. Mom will oversee scholarships and support programs for kids who need to know they're valuable, even when their fathers walk away. That's your legacy, Dad. Not inheritance money, but proof that children can thrive without parents who choose not to love them. Marcus was crying now, the weight of Sophia's words and the consequences of his choices finally hitting him. But it was too late for tears. Sophia had ensured that justice would follow him for whatever time he had left. 3 weeks later, Marcus Webb stood in federal court facing charges of identity fraud, tax evasion, and Social Security fraud. Sophia's documentation had been thorough enough to interest prosecutors in 3 states where Marcus had created false identities to obtain credit and avoid obligations to his abandoned families. I watched from the gallery as the man who'd once promised to love and protect our family was led away in handcuffs. Vanessa Blake sat beside me, having provided additional evidence of Marcus's financial crimes during their marriage. Sophia would have been satisfied with this outcome, Vanessa said quietly. Justice for all the children he abandoned.